Hey everyone, I'm Kyle Racki and welcome to another episode of LTV. Today's show is taken from the Product Qualified webinar that was hosted by Growth Sandwich, and I was a speaker at this year's show, and this episode is the discussion that I had with the host, Aggelos. Our chat is all about how SaaS founders can overcome the fear of selling their product, especially if they're not a born salesperson, and we talk about how to get started selling and scale up to the point where you're navigating enterprise deals. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Check it out.
Hello everyone, I'm Aggelos, CEO at Growth Sandwich, and I'm super happy to host Kyle Racki, CEO of Proposify. Kyle, thank you very much for your time. Could you tell me a little bit more about you, please?
Sure. So I'm Kyle Racki. I run a company called Proposify, which is a software as a service business that helps companies and sales teams with proposals. So helps them with the efficiency of creating them and also delivering a better end result to their prospects.
Kyle, I should admit I was really excited about this discussion because judging from your career so far, you never said no to a big challenge. You have been an agency owner and a product founder twice. And one of the most important traits of a successful entrepreneur is having selling skills. And that's the topic of our discussion, and especially enterprise sales. That is specifically interesting for SaaS founders. So I'd like to ask you, how did you approach sales so far, and how your approach changed when you launched Proposify compared to when you had an agency?
Yeah, so I think what people should know about me is that I'm not what you might call a born hustler or a born salesperson. At least I don't feel that way. Some people are really just meant for it. My business partner, he could sit at a bar and talk up somebody at the bar and like they're a client, later that week kind of thing. I've never really had that talent, but what I have had experience in is, when I was a kid, I actually had to knock on doors to place religious literature. So I grew up in that kind of a religion. And so I just got used to a lot of rejection, a lot of knocking on doors, making pitches, and then basically having the door slammed on my face. So I think that was actually good practice for sales. So the thing I've noticed about salespeople is that they usually can handle rejection very well, and it doesn't bum them out, which most people it would. So, that's a whole other thing. But the way I've approached sales throughout my career has always been, I think, without realizing it, without strategically trying to do it, is just helping, consultative selling. So if I was meeting with a prospect, I would really just try to dig in and understand their business and help them with it right then and there without expecting a sale. And more often than not, people can feel when you're authentic and when you're really trying to help them and you're not just trying to close a deal. And I think that's one of the biggest secrets that a lot of sales reps have to understand is they're always trying to spin the conversation around how do we close this deal instead of really almost detaching yourself a little bit from the sale and just really try to give more than you take.
I want to ask you something out of personal experience. I personally suck at sales. I'm the worst at it. I'm getting actually good when I start speaking about my work, about when I start being consultative. So when the discussion comes to product and marketing, I just get really passionate, which typically works. I don't really intend to do that, but it works. But in terms of prospecting and starting a discussion, I have a big fear that I will sound awkward, that they will reject me, and lots of people have the same fear. So you told me that you offered value in the meeting, but how did you end up having this meeting?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that idea of offering passion, or not even trying to, just passion naturally coming out. I always like to say that, one of the biggest things I always do in personal life is like I'm always trying to push certain movies or certain bands or certain albums on people, and people say that like I'm really pushy about it, but I end up making them watch the movie kind of thing. because I'm just so passionate. Like, oh my God, you have to see this. And I talk. And I'm like, if you could sell your product, people that think they suck at sales, imagine you're trying to convince somebody that, your favorite band or your favorite movie is worth watching or listening to. Sell your product like that. Like, don't hold back on the passion. You hear a lot of people sort of try to be too subdued or too cool or whatever when they're in that kind of a situation. But people feel like people know when you really feel passionate about what you're selling, and it comes across on them. But your question was related to lead generation, I guess, or prospecting, which is a whole other can of worms, I guess. Honestly, I don't think I've ever been fantastic at prospecting, which is why I've opted more for inbound marketing and trying to produce content and speaking and basically ways to get in front of people with offer value first. Don't ask for a meeting. But I have learned a lot more about prospecting over the last couple of years running sales and overseeing a sales team. And I think that there is some practical tips that I could probably offer from the standpoint of how do you get that first meeting? How do you get somebody to sit, step one, I think, is definitely do what I just said, which is create content, get out there and build a personal brand. But outside of that, sometimes you don't have time to do that. You really need to get leads in the door. There's a few things you can do. Number one is, it is a bit of a volume play. It's a matter of really just rolling up your sleeves and doing the work and building the email list or the contact list. Because you will face a lot of rejection, and that's just, our sales reps are doing sometimes, 50 dials a day, and I listen to those calls and I hear them get on the phone with somebody and have them say, no, I'm not interested. And they just kind of move on to the next. So that's a fear you kind of have to get over and get used to. So here's another thing, which is LinkedIn is really the place to, if you're selling to B2B, to try to build that prospecting list. Sales Navigator, all these tools are fantastic. Now, like any tool, it's what you actually do with it. So what everybody does that doesn't work is LinkedIn requests, for instance. They pitch in the actual contact request. People do this all the time. They try to shortcut the sale. That doesn't work. Instead, when you're connecting with somebody on LinkedIn, most people will actually accept your contact requests if it's a very short, simple, hey, I love what you're doing, or I really enjoyed a post I saw by you. Find some way to basically compliment them and just tell them you want to connect because you have mutual interests. Don't pitch in the connection request. The other thing is, when you get the connection request and you're going into the messages, don't pitch in the messages either. People do that all the time. Hey, I'm reaching out because we run a software company and we want to help you. Doesn't work at all. There's tools out there like Lead IQ where you can actually grab their email address from their LinkedIn profile. So at least get into their inbox, because most people, they don't check LinkedIn every day, but they check email multiple times a day. So really get in their inbox as quickly as possible. And then, of course, what is the actual message that you put forth? And it can't be canned. I really believe in personalization. The more you can talk about the prospect in that introductory email, the more likely they're going to read it and get back to you and begin a conversation. So prospecting is really about beginning conversations, getting them to basically raise their hand and say, yeah, I have that problem, and start the discussion, because you're qualifying them as much as they're qualifying you. And so people always try to pitch the meeting in their intro email. That's probably not the right way. This makes you look like you don't even value your own time. Like, I don't even know you, and I'm saying, hey, do you have 15 minutes on the calendar to chat? Instead, why not take a step back and just say, here's what I help people with. Here's a problem that I see a lot of people with your title or your role have. Is that a problem? Or even better yet, I've got some free resource to give you, or, basically the smallest request possible where we don't have to have a conversation yet. So those are just a few things, but happy to go more into them.
You mentioned that you should use LinkedIn and complement a little bit, not jump directly into the sales pitch. Although LinkedIn has become a field of sales recently, and more people are using exactly this tactic. So they add us on LinkedIn, they share an empty compliment. I love your profile. I love your content. I love something. And we already know that there will be a sales pitch in about 3 to 7 days. And lots of people know that at the moment. And I would like to ask you, how can we overcome that? Because the only means of sales at this point of time is either B2B sales, is either LinkedIn or cold emailing. And both of them are outright abused by the market.
Yeah, they are abused, which is why you have to go personal. You have to go authentic. I think cold contact, even cold calling, is never really going to go away if you approach it the right way. Because I don't know about you, but I've responded to cold emails. I've actually bought products from cold emails because they either did them really well or they happened to get me in the exact right moment where I was looking for a solution. I was looking for something around handling credit card disputes. That was a problem that was on my mind for a few weeks. Got a cold call from a company called Mitigator. And I was like, oh my God, yeah, I was looking for exactly something like this. I didn't know it existed. So cold email will always work if you get people in the right, if you happen to get somebody when they're already thinking about the problem, which is hard to do, which is why you have to send out a lot of emails or make a lot of phone calls. But the other way is that you can just get better at starting conversations. So I'm always a big believer that you would approach social media the way you would approach a conference or a networking event, which is you don't walk up to somebody and go, hi there, I make proposal software. Do you have a problem with proposals? Because I can help you. Nobody approaches in-person networking that way, but people approach LinkedIn, of course, that way, and even cold email. So the more personal you can be, for example, one of the, you can do this with your first connections or second connections, is just reference something personal about them. Like, hey, I noticed you had a really, really great post on, closing techniques. Love the post, right? That's it. Or, hey, you and I both know Sarah. She works at your company. Guess what? She used to work at my company. Or we did some work with her when she was at this agency. Those opening lines where you reference a personal thing about them will get much more response. They're not necessarily going to buy from you, but you're going to at least begin a conversation and you're going to stand out from people who come in and just instantly pitch.
Let's jump to enterprise sales for your SaaS business, Proposify. And I would like to dive deep a little bit on that because enterprise sales is a different type of sale. It requires you to find the decision maker. It requires potentially to speak to a lot of different people within the company. It requires patience. And I would like to understand, how did you approach enterprise sales for Proposify? How did it work? And practically speaking, what is the day-to-day basis of doing sales for a SaaS business like yours?
Well, I would say that I don't know if we do true enterprise sales. Enterprise is a pretty broad term, and I think some people look at deal sizes different ways. So they might look at a deal size where, let's say we've closed a $50K contract and say, oh, $50K a year, that's enterprise. Well, it's actually kind of more mid-market. Some people would think enterprise is more like the hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. So just so that people watching or people listening know, we're not closing out $1 million deals with Proposify, but we're kind of attacking the mid-market. But even still, they're very, very similar in terms of how you approach them. If you're selling a mid-market deal, you probably are going to face the same challenges, the same long sales cycles, multiple decision makers. And so this is kind of how we approach it, which is, and it worked the same way with the agencies. You have to have an internal champion at the company first. You have to have somebody who really wants your solution or really wants to work with you. That all goes back to business development, to networking, to personal brand, to referrals, to all those ways to sort of get your foot in the door. And let's assume that you have somebody who it works at the company you want to sell to. They're kind of behind you. They're your internal champion. The next step is you have to realize all the different levels of people you're selling to. So this is where you talk to your person and say, okay, so if you wanted to buy tomorrow, what would you have to do? And you actually get them to tell you their buying process, and then you map your sales process to their buying process. So they might say, well, I'm not actually signing off. I need to get my VP of sales on board. Oh, okay. Can we get her on the phone, or can we get her in a meeting? No. Okay. Well, what does she need to know in order to do it? So then you kind of equip that champion with the materials they need. If you can't get in front of them to then get sign off from their VP, there's going to be probably IT. There's going to be, I've been on the phone once with somebody from IT, privacy, and legal, right? And they all have questions. They're never going to use your solution. They're never going to work with you, but they're the gatekeepers that can say yes or no. We won't allow this, or we will allow this. So just equipping your sales reps, if they're doing it, or yourself, with knowing who are all the different decision makers in that multi-threaded deal to get ultimate sign off at the end. So that's kind of like the one way to approach enterprise sales. And then I guess like the second really big thing is, most people try to close the biggest deal possible, or at least that's what they hope, is like, oh, based on how many reps they have or how many seats they have, this could potentially be a $500,000 a year deal. Well, the length of time and the amount, and the fact is, most people, unless you have a massive brand like Salesforce, are probably never going to go and just give you that $500,000 off the bat. What works really much better is trying to sell the smallest possible deal to get it in the door, sell a pilot or a proof of concept, and map out, okay, so based on this distinct criteria, if we sell this 10 or 20 seat deal and within 3 months we get your close rate or whatever benchmark it is from here to here, you will then onboard the next 100 users. And so you work out this kind of pilot deal where you get in the door, you make the first sale, and then you expand it later on. So those kind of two things are one of the primary ways that we sell into the mid-market.
What is typically the life cycle of a sale like the one you described?
I mean, it totally depends. Sometimes the biggest deals close fairly quickly because they're trying to get it done before their next renewal if they're switching from existing software. Sometimes smaller deals will take a year to close because there just wasn't a lot of urgency, or a decision maker left and somebody else came on and it took a long time to get on their radar. A lot of people are saying, call us back in 2020 when we have new budget. So these are all just the realities of sales. Is, you try to create as much of a sense of urgency as you can. This is why on discovery calls and on your initial calls, you really have to poke and prod at their problem and let them describe how much this problem is costing them. Because if you can't create that sense of urgency, like we need this now, deals are just going to drag on forever because they're going to wait until they have budget or wait till it's much easier to buy. You have to try to close them as quickly as possible, but also not rush the sale. You have to kind of have a balance between the two.
And when you get rejected at the first point, or at least ignored, let's focus at ignored, which is more frequent. Mm-hmm. How much should you push? And that's the awkward part sometimes. And the second part of the question, should it be you that does the sales, or should you hire somebody? What is the critical time to have someone else that pushes for these sales?
Oh, sorry, we just had a little bit of a freeze there.
Did you hear my question?
I think I did. So it's how basically, when do you give up when you're getting ignored? And
by the way, don't worry, I will edit this part out. Let me ask the question again.
Sure.
So that we edit the whole thing out.
Okay.
Actually, I will focus on the second part and then ask about the awkward thing because it was two different questions.
Okay.
So I'd like to ask you now, what is the right time to actually hire somebody to sell for you? Because lots of founders out there insist into doing their own sales, while others believe that it's better to have someone that isn't emotionally attached to the product, so it's easier for him or her to handle rejection.
Oh, I mean, I think whoever has that latter opinion is just flat out wrong because the fact is the founders are going to naturally be the best salespeople. Even if you don't have a sales background, because you're emotionally attached to the product, your passion is going to come forth. Nobody buys from sales reps that are dispassionate. They don't buy from reps that are pushy and have what they call sales breath, who are just trying to get their commission. If you get sales reps that are just passionate about hitting quota and getting their commission, that's totally different than passionate for the product. or the service. Passion for the company is absolutely mission critical to closing. So founders typically are really good at sales, or at least the best initial salespeople, and probably should be the first salesperson at the company until you realize that either lead volume is too high and now you need an SDR or a BDR to help you qualify some leads. And then once you have kind of a pretty good idea of your positioning in the market, how you pitch, how you close, and you think you can teach that, then you should go out and hire, I would say, 2 reps off the bat, because then you can kind of test them against each other and say, this person is successful, this one isn't, so it's probably the person. Or if neither are successful, it could be your positioning is off, or there's some aspect of the sales process that isn't figured out, and you can work with them on that. So I think starting with 2, maybe even 3 sales reps when it comes time to hire is the best approach. And then if you're, when you can make those reps successful, or you figure that it's time to hire somebody who really knows what they're doing from a leadership perspective, like a director or a VP or a manager, to kind of run that team, especially one who's built a startup sales process from scratch. That's extremely important, because you can go out and raise a ton of money and hire a VP at giant company X, and that VP of sales may not be the best person to figure out your sales process. They're maybe the best one to scale it later on. But you really need that person who's had that early stage startup experience to build the sales process from the beginning. And if you can do it as a founder, even better. Not everybody has that talent. I certainly don't.
I have a lot of more questions. I will try to pick my favorite ones. So actually, a question that isn't the most badass sales question. There are a lot of founders out there that are pure techies, that are introvert people, that know about product, that know about coding, that know about design, but they're not salespeople. Are they doomed? What can we do about them? By the way, I'm one of them.
Well, you're very hard on yourself, but I mean, from the interactions I've had with you, you don't seem introverted. You seem very warm and genuine, and I actually feel very relaxed in your presence. So I think that we're our own worst critics. We always are very hard on ourselves. I actually have a similar background, more of product, more tech, and people think that I'm this really extroverted person, but I'm actually not. So I think either way, introverted or extroverted, it doesn't matter. You can be a great salesperson regardless. Now, that said, I do think that startups that have heavy, like say the 2 co-founders are both technical and neither have marketing or sales background, that presents a risk. Absolutely. If I was looking at it from an investor's perspective, I would bet more money on somebody who's got a tech co-founder and a marketing and sales co-founder working together, because there's just a lot of learning. It's kind of like if you have 2 co-founders that are both sales and marketing with no technical, then you're like, okay, well, they can go out and try to learn coding, but it would take them 10 or 20 years to get where somebody else could be today. So it's similar in that way. But that being said, I think technical co-founders can learn how to sell and learn how to market and at least get initial traction. You're maybe not the person who's going to scale, a 100-person sales team, nor should it be that who does that. Being able to get early stage traction and get your first 10, 20, 30 customers absolutely is within the power of a technical introvert if they want to and if they have the motivation, which typically if you have a startup and your startup will die without sales, there's heavy motivation to learn.
Actually, one more question. I'd like to ask you, what is the worst thing that you have done, the most ridiculous thing potentially that you have done in terms of sales? And what is the one thing that is the most impressive thing that you have done in terms of the same topic?
Well, I've done a lot of ridiculous things, so it's hard to pin it down to one. I think we made a mistake in the last year where we raised some money and we tried to scale our sales process too quickly. We hired too many people off the bat, and then we really didn't set any of them up for success and had to let quite a few of them go. That was probably one of the biggest mistakes that we had made. There's a huge focus especially in VC world and Silicon Valley world, that money and capital equals revenue growth, that basically you put money in the company, you hire a bunch of people, and then that translates on the other end to revenue. And that actually is, I think it's a myth, and I think it's a misconception that I would love to bust for a lot of people, that, you could hand most startups, if you were to just give them $100 million and say, go out and scale revenue, most would have no idea how to do that. There's a select few. We always look at the outliers, like the Slacks of the world and these high growth SaaS companies that are able to do it, but they are outliers. Most startups have to figure it out on the ground level. And only when you realize that, we just have to hire another sales pod, give them 3 months ramp, and give them these materials and training, and we can do that times 10. We just need the money now to hire them in the first place. To get there is extremely, extremely difficult.
And in terms of the best thing that you have done?
I think that most of startup and company success comes down to the team that you hire. Early stage, when you're just starting out, a lot of the growth and a lot of the momentum is driven by the founder. But I think that once you get into, a few years in, you've got, say $1 million in revenue and growing, your success will be completely decided by the people that you decide to hire and run your departments. So I think that the best thing that I've probably done is being able to find amazing talent that's very much a fit culturally and helped us build a great culture in Proposify, but also really strong at what they do, because ultimately, like my CMO, my head of product and CTO and director of sales, like these are all people that can do incredible things that I can't do myself. So I'll only give myself the credit for finding them and hiring them.
Kyle, thank you very much. That was really useful. That was a little bit of a therapy session as well for me.
Yeah, was it?
Thank you for that. I wish we have the chance to speak again in the future. Until then, I'm really excited to see your shift to upmarket for Proposify. I'm actually a customer of Proposify. Amazing job.
Thank you.
Whoop, whoop. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
My pleasure. It was great chatting.
Bye.
This episode of Lifetime Value is brought to you by Proposify. Proposify improves sales productivity so your team spends less time creating proposals and more time selling. Start your free trial at proposify.com and be sure to hit the subscribe button so you never miss a single episode.